It's a real pleasure. I'm here with Richard Susskind. Richard is an amazing author. You've done work especially in the legal profession and how technology is changing that. You've just published a new book, Digital Courts. So I would love to learn more about what that is.
It's the pleasure of mine to be here. It's fantastic. My new book's called Online Courts and the Future of Justice, and it's about the way in which technology might transform our court system. And I use that term advisedly because it's not about simply automating our old ways of working. But the best place to start is the problem, and the problem that some people call the access to justice problem. The OECD, for example, have said that only 46% of people on planet Earth live under the protection of the law. That's to say, have realistic access to lawyers and court services. And in some court systems, there's unimaginable backlogs. For example, in Brazil, there's 100 million cases within their court system unresolved. And with India, there's 30 million. But even in countries where you'd say the system's advanced and sophisticated, for most of us, and I include you and me, the idea of litigation is too costly, it's too time consuming, it's hugely combative, and somehow feels out of step in a digital society. Another way of looking at it is it doesn't scale. We've got a marvellous system here for resolving major commercial disputes, but there are hundreds of thousands, millions of cases in people's everyday lives that they just don't get near to the courts, and so they don't manage to enforce their entitlements. The question I ask is, are there not ways we can use technology to help? And the fundamental question I ask is court a service or a place? Do you really need physically to congregate to sort out your legal problems?
Fascinating. So what are some of the technologies that would enable an online court?
It's interesting because some of the technologies are quite, certainly by your standards, are quite basic. But I anticipate a first and a second generation. So let me say a little bit about each. The first generation there's two components. There's the idea that people who are using the court system communicate with the judge and other parties essentially by some form of electronic communication. They submit evidence and arguments to the judge online, and the judge will receive evidence and arguments from all sides and will come to a conclusion. Lawyers often say on the papers alone. That's to say without any oral evidence or appearance in a physical courtroom. And I call this online judging. Yeah. So it's a judge essentially, it's almost like an advanced form of email, but it's an asynchronous process. You're not meeting together. That's online judging.
Very much sense.
Makes sense for low value cases, just a proportionate way of handling it. The second aspect of online courts, certainly the first generation, is what I call the extended courts. And the idea here is to say, in a digital society, surely we can have court services that go beyond decision making by judges. Because in an era where people cannot afford legal advice, where legal aid is hardly available, people need advice on what their entitlements are. So the idea here is to have some kind of diagnostic systems that can help people understand their rights and responsibilities, can guide them as to the options available to them, can help them formulate their arguments and assemble their evidence, and even provide alternative means of resolving disputes where some cases it doesn't make sense to go to the online judge, and so they might be able to be resolved in a different way. All of this, though, is part of the public state court system. There's another field which is called online dispute resolution, which is a private sector enterprise, but I'm talking here about radically upgrading our public court system.
So what's the second generation?
The second generation is when we begin to use AI. I should actually say that the diagnostic systems I mentioned in the first generation are quite like the kind of expert systems I worked on. I did my PhD in Oxford in the 80s and worked in expert systems in law. Very similar kind of technology, like a huge decision tree to help people through their problems. So that's still in the first generation. But the second generation, I asked the question, might machines ever come to decisions rather than judges? This is hugely controversial. And the point isn't here, can a machine reason or think or emote or moralize like a human judge? The point isn't, can a machine generate decisions with reasons like a judge? The question is, in an era where huge numbers of disputes will never be resolved in the traditional way, might we look at it entirely differently? And I call it outcome thinking, that often people just want their dispute resolved quickly without much confrontation, so they can go on with life. Often they want just an opportunity to present their arguments to someone independent. Often they just would value the opportunity out of a structured engagement about their problems, rather than often lawyers think that people want the court system. And I say, for example, people don't want neurosurgeons, they want health. I say people don't want lawyers and judges, they want their disputes resolved.
Yeah.
And the illustration I give, and it bears in your own work in machine learning and your interest in artificial intelligence, is there's an emerging field when people are looking at the prediction of judicial decisions. And what we're seeing in a variety of ways is that these systems are beginning to perform at quite a high level. So it's entirely conceivable within a relatively small number of years, we will have systems that can predict the outcome of court decisions based on a whole bundle of past decisions. And in a rather simplistic way, that's what the court system often does. They make decisions on the basis of past decisions. So I ask the question, say, of the 100 million people in Brazil whose backlog will not be resolved by traditional decision making. Imagine if they were offered this. The court says it's unlikely we'll resolve your dispute in the traditional way, but what we might be able to do is offer you the possibility of a machine learning system making a prediction about the likely outcome of your case. Would you be willing to accept that as a binding determination if the level of certainty that the system produces is, say, above 95%? And that's the kind of thing I think about in the book, and it seems to me it's an intriguing possibility.
Yeah.
Lawyers and judges, of course, get very nervous because it's not traditional judicial decision making. I get very nervous because otherwise it's not clear to me how we can solve the access to justice problem.
So what do you see as some of the biggest obstacles and barriers to actually move towards this online court system, be it generation 1 or 2?
You need to have political will to bring about a transformation to a public institution. And in many ways, I describe my work as precisely that. People often say they want transformation, and then you show them what transformation is, and they say, oh, that's not really, what I really want is automation. They don't say that. But actually, transformation, saying court is no longer or no longer always a place where people physically congregate, that's pretty challenging stuff. So you need the political will to drive this through. You need, in any country, the backing of the judges. You need, to some extent, the support of the lawyers. You need funding. You need technological capability, because technology projects are hard to deliver. And then there's an interesting question of method, whether or not you become very ambitious and say, let's apply this technology across all our problems, and I'm mainly talking about civil problems rather than criminal problems here, or do we say, actually, we should just pick out some pilot areas and let it evolve from a lower level and drift up? And that's to do with system development, project management experience, it seems to me.
Fascinating idea. So what would you say are some of the key takeaways then from the book, or the key points you would like people to consider?
I think firstly that we have a grave access to justice problem, that most people don't have realistic prospects of obtaining legal advice and resolving their differences. I say secondly that the way to think about this is in terms of outcomes, that what we're not trying to do here is automate or systematise or turbocharge the current system. We have to think entirely differently. We have to transform using technology to allow us to resolve publicly disputes in ways that previously weren't possible. I say also that the intuitive objections that many people will have, oh, that system won't be as open or as transparent as the conventional system, or how can you get a fair trial without assembling in person, or will this not lead to a more litigious society? I think most of these arguments can be met by thinking in this way, rather than comparing my proposals to some ideal compared to what we have to just now, which is a substantially broken system. And so I'm always encourage people to say, it's the old Voltaire thing, the best is the enemy of the good. What we're looking for here is improvement rather than perfection.
Very good. Thank you very much. Fascinating.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.